I have a friend, Sal. He's still away now, 35 years later. And, he's on a case exactly identical to mine. And, we begged him to take the plea. I said, take the plea. Take the plea. Just admit you're guilty. They drop charges. They want to keep the system moving. It'll grind to a halt. It's very expensive to try everyone. So
it's also a victory for them as well, too. They can show a victory with less manpower and less time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hope you're ready for another episode of Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Now, let's dive in. Well, speaking of the Founding Fathers in Washington, perfect segue, how the hell did you end up getting involved in organized crime? Not that they have anything to do with each other. I'm just using one as a bridge to the other.
Yeah, no, that's great. We're live, right? I guess, we are.
Yeah, they hit record They hit record a while ago. And this is the beauty of editors. They can just slice in whenever we're going.
That's
so we're
great.
off.
So how did I get involved? We really didn't have much growing up. So you grow up and you don't have a lot. And, my parents worked hard. Nobody went to school. Nobody went to college in my family. So a lot of times.
What'd your parents do?
My father was in the car business. His brothers owned an auto body collision shop, and he was an insurance adjuster. And my mother's side were all heavy machinery, bulldozer operators, backhoes. My cousin now does a crane, which they pay really well. But my grandfather came out. My grandfather was in World War II, and he did 2 years. And he was there. He was at Lady Gulf. I didn't know till I came home from jail. My aunt left me a manila folder. And when she died, she had a manila folder of all my grandfather's stuff. He never talked about the war. And I opened it up. 8 Bronze Stars, Asiatic Pacific, an award from heroism. Where they got hit at Okinawa by a kamikaze, and he was instrumental in putting out the fires and saving some lives. And they wrote up some stuff in the newspaper. We had the articles and stuff. And literally like the hair stood up on my arm because I never knew. He never talked about it. And so when he got out of the Navy, he had friends back then that got him into the Union. So he went to work driving heavy machinery. He did a lot of the highways, the Midtown Tunnel in New York. And that was what he did his whole life. And then my uncle did it, and his son. And my uncle was a hijacker too. So my uncle would drive heavy machinery. And also too he was crooked. My mother's family was crooked. And my grandfather took numbers at a bar, which wasn't really harmful. I mean, it's just gambling. But now you could gamble anywhere, Las Vegas, Atlantic City. You could go anywhere to gamble. But back then, he took numbers at a bar. And but he was a war hero. And I never knew that until I got home from prison. But so getting back to my family, so half my mother's side was in construction. My father's side was in the car business, auto collision. And really, I didn't want to do either one. I was always on a machine from when I was a kid. They used to take me on the bulldozers and the backhoes and stuff, excavators. But I really didn't want to do it for a livelihood. And then I got tied up in crime young because I'd go out with some friends who were a little wild, and we'd steal some cars, we'd dump them and go home. And then at some point or another, somebody asked us for the parts. We started selling the parts, and to auto collision shops, by the way, that did business with my whole family, but they knew not to say anything, obviously, to my father or my uncles. And it's crazy because you're dealing, I'd have a guy, I'd bring him a ton of parts, and he'd say, "How's your father?" I'd say, "Good. How's your uncles doing?" "Good. I haven't seen him." Yeah. So, and I knew not to I didn't even have to ask him, "Don't say anything." He knew that, so they all did. So, that was sort of like, how I started. And then at some point I was in an auto body collision shop, and they used to have, I don't know if you've seen, probably like Snap-on and Matco trucks. Those, they look like SWAT trucks. They're those big, like box.
Yeah, they really do, actually. That's a good description.
Yep. And they were driving all over in the body shop areas. And one day the guy came, and I was talking to a guy I was delivering parts to, and the truck came and went. And I said, I was asking about the toolboxes, and he said, these boxes go for thousands, the tools in them goes in those trucks, probably got like $100,000 worth of stuff on them. So I said, "You want one?" And that's how it all started, and I hijacked one of those trucks, and then I went to another one, and then I went to other trucks, and then I started to meet guys on the street, started to sell stuff. And when John Gotti killed Paul Castellano in Midtown Manhattan, he took the power base of the Gambino crime family from Brooklyn and Staten Island, and he moved it over to Queens. So as I'm growing up and becoming a criminal in the life in the mid 80s, that's at the same time as when John took over power and brought the power base to Queens. So, I'm meeting people that are connected to him. And then at some point or another, I end up pretty much staying in that for years. I was in and out of the house of Pete Gotti, John's oldest brother, Pete, for years. I mean, I was in and out of that house. And on the weekends, I met, I don't know if you've probably seen or your listeners, Vincent Chingiganti. He was the mob boss who used to wander the streets of Greenwich Village talking to parking meters. He played the nut job role to avoid prosecution. And I met his daughter, became very close with his daughter. So on the weekends, I'd stay at his house. So I was in and out of the Gotti houses all week and then staying at Chin's house. He lived with his mother on Sullivan or Houston Street. And he had a house, though, in Old Tapan where his family lived. Because he ran the family from down from the Lower Manhattan. So I would stay at the house there, and then I'd drop them off into the city. They'd see him on a Sunday. So I'm still close friends with Rita, his daughter, to this day, 35 years later. As for the Gottis, I don't really stay in touch with them, but the Arenas I'm very close with. The Arenas were, Vic Arena was the boss of the Colombo family, and his son, Vic Jr., who was a captain at the time, he's an older guy, he's older than me. He went straight. So as long as somebody went straight and I know I could trust them and they're not involved anymore, I was able to stay close with him, and he's a gem of a guy. He lives a few minutes away from me, so we see each other every week. But that's probably why we stayed friends. I mean, we both, because you hear a lot of times guys are in the joint with you and they tell you they're leaving the life, they're going to, pick up the right way when they go home, and then they go right back to it. I just had a friend that did 22 or 24 years. He was home a couple of years, and we talked constantly. And I was so happy to have him home after all that time. I sent him commissary every month. I stayed behind him, and he gets home, and then one day I'm calling him and I'm not getting a response. And I'm like, maybe he's busy. And then more time lapsed, and I started to wonder if he's all right. I went online. I started looking around, check, if anything came up. I wanted to see, he had told me he opened up a tire shop in addition to promoting UFC fights in Connecticut. And I said, let me see if maybe I just get the number to the tire shop and give a ring. And when I went to look for the tire shop, I found out that he was arrested for selling tons of fentanyl. And it just broke my heart. Yeah. So he's done. So he did 20 something years, and now he's just, right back, and he's not going to get out. I'm sure they'll throw away the key this time. And he was lucky enough to get out, believe it or not, with that prison reform stuff that Trump passed in the last administration, which was a plus for a lot of people. I don't want to knock it. I think it was a good thing. I think they did it right. They structured it right. But I will say a few people did get out that probably shouldn't have gotten out. And that's always the case. There's always good and bad with everything. But I think the attempt that he made to try to reform the justice system was well-intentioned. And, I just feel like a lot of people did benefit from it who deserved, there are a lot of people who were rotting away. They sold some drugs and they were in there. I never went near the drug business. It was like anathema to me, because I had someone who was an addict in my family, and my mother, I saw the pain that my family went to. So I would never go near drugs, never sold it, never dealt in it. And it was also outlawed in the family. You couldn't, even though John Gotti and his crew had done it at one time, it wasn't allowed. It was like, don't listen to what I say, not what I do. It was like one of those things. But you weren't allowed to deal drugs. If you did want to, because there was a lot of money in it, I had friends that did want to go that route. They would have to ask to get released from the Borgata, and then they would go sell the drugs or do whatever they wanted to do. But the people who were running the family did not want people in the DEA following them to a social club and, making the drug case. Yeah. They just didn't want it. They don't need it because they got other rackets. They're controlling the garment industry, the meat packing industry, the trucking industry. Who needs to get pinched for a bunch of kilos of cocaine? So that was pretty much in a nutshell. So that's how I got involved. And once I started to meet people, my word was good. You know, if my word, I told you, say, you know, hey, Andy, I'll be there Tuesday, 2:00 with a truck. I was there Tuesday, 2:00. Come rain or shine, hell or high water, I'm coming. And I was good with money too. I paid guys in my crew. If we made 100 grand and there's 5 of us, I'd say, look, we get 20 each. You know, if there's 4 of us, we get 25 each. Whatever the case is, I was always transparent. I was always good. And I think that helped me to go up quick in whatever I was doing. And I kept those ethics with me from an unethical world. Obviously, I don't want to confuse it with that, but from that unethical world, I had certain ethics that I kept with me throughout life. And I think by the grace of God, I've had, a fair amount of success because of that. I feel. Yeah.
So, you're talking about getting involved in crime when you're younger. How do you know when because not all crime is connected to organized crime. New York City, massive. Maybe it probably has its tentacles pretty deep in there, especially during that time period. But just because somebody steals a car doesn't mean that the mafia has asked them to do so. How do you know when you've made that jump from being somebody who is involved in a criminal lifestyle to now you are actually connected and a part of a mafia family?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You're meeting different people, and you're meeting a lot of guys on the street that know someone who knows someone who's connected to an associate who hangs out with someone who's married to someone. So you kind of like you're making your way through these different people and on a daily basis because you're involved in the criminal world. And it's like a subculture that you need to adapt to. I wasn't raised. A lot of the guys I hung out with that were my dearest friends came from mob families where the father was a wise guy, or the uncle, the grandfather was a wise guy. 2 cousins were wise guys. So they're sort of like, it's ingrained in them from birth. There's nothing that they don't know. They go to wakes and funerals. They're around the entire mob their whole lives. And then I'm being introduced to it, and I'm meeting these guys, and I'm picking up things along the way, and I'm learning things. And, I was fortunate enough to be around some old timers that I met that would patiently correct me if I did something wrong. And they would say, no, Louis, that's not how we do things. And they took the time. I guess they saw that there was promise in me, and they would make money with me in the long run. But you're not always going to get that. People might have, there were impatient mobsters I met too, who they don't, you did something wrong. It's time to kill you. Or it's time to get rid of you, chase you. We don't want nothing to do with you. I was around people that were good, and I picked up things along the way of how it works. And it's learning an entirely different subculture it was literally eventually inculcated in my mind until I came home at 33. Because even during the prison years, I'm still living that life. I'm still around mobsters in jail. I'm still around gangs in jail, different gangs and of different ethnicities, and all of those various peoples are they're the part of me. So it's so part of you. Like when I got out, to try to disassociate that part of my mind was difficult. Like sometimes I would try to have like an intellectual conversation with somebody who's an academic or something and discuss all the books I had read while I was in jail. Cause I read 18 hours a day, and we could get to that, but I read like 18 hours a day when I was in jail, and I read thousands of books. And, I'm desperate to have conversations with people who've read like me, and I could have a conversation with them and then literally like 5 minutes later bump into a friend from the street and go back to talking that jargon. And so like, it was almost like my brain was split. And a lot of the words I had read so much in prison that a lot of my vocabulary I had never heard spoken. So I would be speaking to people, sometimes an academic or an historian or whoever I met along the way, and I'd say a word that I completely botched, and the person would be like, what was that? And I'd say it again. Yeah. I had no idea how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
And because I never heard the word spoken, I had only read it and then, learned the meaning either through context or looked it up in a dictionary and understood the meaning. But my own vocabulary that's floating around in my mind, I had never really said those words. So that was like, it was hard in the beginning, it's like, and then I'm still in that mindset. I would think that you have to experience a little of what I did where you know what you've done and the things you what you're capable of and where you've been. And then you might get some like jerk who like, screaming and yelling at you in a car. And you probably say to yourself, oh my gosh, this idiot has no idea what I could do to him. And, you have to just like then control yourself, take a deep breath and just, you know who you are. You have to have that confidence and you don't need to show him who you are. He's just an idiot that's passing through your life and he'll be gone in 3 seconds. So I experienced that too when I came home. I lived in that world where the tougher element of the guys we were around, if you made a mistake, they chopped you up and put you in a hefty bag. And those are the guys I'm around. And then I'm in jail where people are killing each other in Lewisburg. My first day in population in Lewisburg Penitentiary, the Aryan brother hacked to death and gutted 2 black Muslims.
Wow.
Welcome to the pen. Yeah. So like,
no shit.
Yeah. And then,
that's tough to put on a Hallmark card. Welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then I would call home and my mother died when I was young, but my father would say, how is it in there? And I'd say, oh, I love it. It's great. Club fed, Dad. It's like, it's a dream in here. It's everything you heard about how nice the feds are, but he didn't know that the federal penitentiaries are a lot different from federal mediums or lows, where they send like white collar criminals and stuff who did a pyramid scheme on Wall Street or something. It was much different. It was where the worst of the worst were. And they classified me as dangerous and put me there. So, to get back, I leave there and I'm coming home and some guy's like, you know what I'll do to you? And I'm like, yeah, I know what you'll do to me. Yeah. And I know. Yeah. Yeah. So
you got to give him a pass.
Exactly.
I've gotten to a point in my life, an age of my life with enough laps around the sun.
Yeah.
I just try to remember that they're probably just having a bad day and not being the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
So like you said, let it go. They're going to be an asshole in your life for 3 seconds. Just move on.
Exactly.
Not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the smarter mindset. And,
I didn't have it when I was younger.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It takes age and maturity to realize it. And confidence in yourself. If you, when we're young, we're a little insecure too. And we have to not only know it, but show it. And when you're older, you don't have to show it. I feel like it's just like, okay. But yeah, so that's, so I meet different guys and that's kind of like, you eventually meet guys who are real and that's who the guys you want to attach yourself to.
So obviously you ended up in prison. I'm going to get to that. How high could you have gone not being born into that family from an outsider? How high could you have actually ascended that organization had you not gotten caught in
life? Yeah, you could become the boss in the family. John Gotti.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. John Gotti was never, he didn't have a family John Gotti's father used to hang out by the club now and then. And a guy I knew used to take him to the racetrack once in a while. And his father had nothing to do with organized crime. It's just that he raised the family of all the sons did. And, most of the sons. So, John didn't come from that life. He got introduced into that life. The closest association he had was probably his best friend, Angelo Ruggiero, who knew or was related to Emilio Della Croce, who was the underboss of the family. And that's how John sort of made his way into the family. But by time, I'm around, I knew all the Gottis and all the Gottis were like, John had brothers, Richie, Vinny, Peter. Peter's the one, his house is the house I was in all the time. And then I was around, Joe Butch was a captain in the family. He had a stepson I was very close with. Jackie Nose was a captain in the family. He had a stepson I was very close with. So I was around all their families, but those were families that came from the life. Joe Butch's father was in the life. Joe Butch's son was in the life. They were like generational, and a lot of them were like the Gambinos and Castellanos, not just meaning the Gambino family, but his immediate family, his blood family. There were a lot of different Gambinos and Castellanos in the Gambino family that were interrelated. They were intermarried and stuff back from Palermo. And they were mob since Palermo, since Sicily. So they go back generations. It's, you're talking like, in America, if you're talking about like the nouveau rich as opposed to like the DuPonts, or whoever it might be, like Standard Oil, Rockefellers, where it's like somebody did it over 100 years ago and it's generational, that money, and it's ingrained in them. That's sort of like, but John was a newcomer and Castellano was born into that life. He was a Castellano. He was married to a Gambino. They went all the way back to Sicily, his family.
Wow.
And yeah, but John sort of like upended the old regime when he took over. He sort of, so they had all these rackets that they had made in the early to mid 20th century, where they infiltrated the garment industry, they infiltrated the meatpacking industry, the trucking industry, the garbage industry, waste removal. But you hold that. So a guy like John who's coming up, he's hijacking trucks like I am. Nobody hands you anything in the mob. That's like you earn and you hope to move up as you earn.
Mhm.
And, that's sort of like what the goal is. But the guys who control the big rackets like waste removal, which is $1 billion industry, they don't go, "Oh, Louis, you're part of it." The Borgado, the Brugade, they used to say, "We're going to give you your check every month. Here's your end." You're not getting anything. You're lucky. You're lucky if they don't ask you to throw out the garbage for them, and then you got to go tell them to go scratch. Yeah, they ain't giving nothing. So so like it's like you got to come up on your own. And so when John took over the family, all of those old time guys now had to answer to him. And now he's in control of all those major rackets that were built into the family. Vic Arena, same thing. So I was very close with Vic Arena, and he took over the Colombo family at one point. Vic Arena, the father, who's away serving life now, gem of a guy, stand-up guy. He got like, I don't know how many life sentences plus 300 and something years. And he just smiled and said, no problem, and went his way. Like that. I played the game and I lost, and he understood it. But his son beat a major racketeering murder Rico, and said, "I'm going to go clean." And he did. He went straight. But when they took over the family, they were also new guys. They came up on their own. The father was first generation, and he took it from Persico. And they basically then, they inherit all of the rackets that are built into the family. And then it's how good you work the machine. If you're a good boss, you got to work the machine. And there's an instance I could tell you where how things are built in. This is a smaller example, but it tells you exactly how a family works. So there are all these rackets built into the machine, and then whoever takes over and owns those rackets, and it all flows up to him. But I'll give you a smaller example. A friend of mine was his name was Anthony, and he took over. He was a union organizer from when he was young. And he was a legitimate guy. Eventually, he had to get in with the mob because he found himself constantly having sit-downs with mob guys who were had infiltrated unions. So every time he's got a union beef and he goes to sit down with a guy, it's either some suit and glasses guy who graduated an Ivy League school, or it's some guy smoking a cigar, just got out of a Cadillac, because they're both involved in unions. So every time he would have to go to a sit-down, he would have to go find someone to speak for him. And eventually that's when they said, "Look, we'll just straighten you out, make you part of the family." And another guy who did rebar in Manhattan, he supplied the rebar for the Trade Center. Tommy Petrizzo, I think he passed away, so I think I could say his name. He was another one too, constantly involved with the mob in one way or another, but he was a legitimate guy. But eventually they approached him and said, "Look, if we give you your button and bring you in, then you could deal directly with these people." And they're legitimate guys who really aren't violent, but they did it because it expedites the way their world works. It facilitates a lot of problems where they don't have to go find a rabbi to speak for them. And so at some point or another, Anthony was telling me he took the post of the highest in the Teamster union that he was in. He took the post of, he wasn't the Teamster president like a Hoffa, but he took the post of whatever the regional Teamster was, Teamster division. And he goes, "Lou, I'll be honest with you." He said, "When I took over, there were envelopes landing on my desk every day, and I didn't even know what they were all for." He's dead serious. And then he goes, "I'd have to say, what's this one for? What's that one for? What's this one for? What's that one for?" And he said, it took me there's a learning curve before I realized that these were all things that were happening before I stepped into the position. And then obviously envelopes got to go out too, and he's got to learn that. Then eventually he went to jail, and he only did I think he did like 6 years. He got out, and then he passed away. He was an older guy when he went away. They didn't hammer him because they knew, I guess the judge and the prosecutors knew that he was pretty much an innocent guy for the most part, notwithstanding the fact that if he wanted to elevate inside the union, he had to eventually get with the mobsters. But he was always sort of a semi-legitimate guy. He wasn't this guy who's going to chop you up and put you in a bag or ever even threaten to do that. he's the kind of guy you'd golf with, and you'd say, gee, I never knew that guy was in the mob. He's never even raised his voice or said a curse word. That was the kind of guy he was. He was, he could go literally sit down with Wallbounds or Key Food or Publix or one of the major food chains and argue to try to get his workers, an extra penny an hour, and an extra benefit or something, with regard to health insurance or something, and argue with all these corporate guys, and then go meet the mob guys at the social club for an hour and get straighten out stuff with them, and then be on his way. So it was you meet those kind of guys too, and they have a lot of them in the mob too.
What's the button you reference? You said you'll get him. Is this an actual button that people wear?
No, it's just it's hypothetical. It's like so they say so I was only 24, turning 25 when I went away, and I faced the rest of my life in prison. Had I stayed on the street, the friends that I was around, all the guys that I was hijacking with and doing things with, they all got their buttons right after I went to jail, because we would have gotten it together. I would have gotten it with them. So it's basically they straighten you out, they initiate you, then you become a made member of the family, where you're part of it. You're no longer an associate, you're made. And then they say you get your stripes if they make you a captain. So they might say something like Louis so-and-so, Joey got these, and he's referring to stripes as if you would, as something like they probably take it from the military. You have
rank structure.
Yeah, same thing. Exactly.
Okay.
So-and-so got his stripes. That means he's a captain now. And then they could break you, like when Vic Orena took over the family, the Colombo family, there were people who were loyal to him that he elevated. And there were people that he felt that he would never get loyalty from them, who were loyal to Persico. So he broke them. He broke them down to soldiers if they were captains. And it's basically just to like disempower them so that they can't launch a coup, or it's harder for them to launch a coup against you. A boss has to choose who's going to be initiated, and then a boss also has to choose who's going to be elevated and who's going to get broken. You make and break men.
Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex, and he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. I love cooking. I like cooking at home. I don't like putting sauces and overbearing things on the things that I cook, so I tried a little bit of the salt. And if I'm being honest, I tried a little bit too much the first time. It was a little spicy. So I had to back it off a little bit, and it made everything that I cook at home taste better. So it's an easy addition to the things that I already make. It tasted amazing. I was using the product for well over 6 months before Alex reached out to present as the sponsor for Change Agents. Easy peasy. I was already doing it, no additional time, a touch point with it in my personal life. I could talk about it from personal experience. Love what the brand stands for. Love what the brand was founded around. Enjoy the person who founded the brand. I mean, this is a match made in heaven. Get out of the comfort zone of what you can get in the grocery store. Go online to Firecracker Farm and use the code Ironclad for 15% off of your first order. You're going to be shocked at how much more of a flavor it brings out in what you cook. The structure you're describing, it's an interesting confluence of military hierarchy and Fortune 500 structure, for personnel structure. And I wonder, I mean, my experience with the Mafia is largely from television, which I take everything I see on TV or a screen of any size with a massive grain of salt. You know, I don't think The Sopranos was a documentary, nor did I actually make my way through the entire series anyway. It just, that one never grabbed me. I completely missed that tsunami that crushed people. But it almost sounds, and I'm curious your thoughts, I think it would be easy for people to think that it was a loose and fast organization. They're kind of making stuff up as they go. The way I'm listening to you describe this, it was highly structured, or it seems like it was much more highly structured. There's not accidental things happening. They're actually running this either like, you know, a paramilitary operation or a Fortune 500 or whatever the hell that amalgamation of those two things would be. That's
exactly right. Even on my level, and I'm all the way down at the bottom, I'm hijacking trucks. We were indicted eventually for banks, trucks, and armored cars. So there's nothing, you know, we didn't do. And that's sort of like I ran a crew. So it was my own crew. I was the leader of the crew, but I answered directly to the heads of my family. And if I was, let's say, for example, I had a tip. Let's say you said to me, I work at JFK Airport and there's a truck coming out of there on Tuesday at 5:00 and it's going to be loaded to the gills with whatever, something that's worth a lot of money today. I would say, okay, where's it coming out of? Which depot, which trucking company? And you might tell me, and I'll say, oh, that's so-and-so from the Lucchese family. I know I can't rob his truck. So, and that did happen to me once where I did rob a truck and I didn't know it was so-and-so from the Lucchese family. So I'm giving you a hypothetical that's based on reality. And the guy went bananas. And when he found out I hijacked his truck and then it ended up in a sit down, we had a sit down. I explained to him I had no idea it was your truck. And then we kind of like hashed out the fact that he put in an insurance claim. He will get paid. He'll probably put in an insurance claim for higher than it was and he'll get paid more. So in a way I did him a favor, but for him, it was disrespectful that somebody hijacked his truck. It's a blow to his ego. And I had no choice but to apologize to him and say, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was your trucking company. It won't happen again. And that's, basically we shake hands and we go our own way. And then, then my guy who's sticking up for me on the ride home, I could say, what an asshole, but that's between us. Yeah.
You save that for the car ride.
You save that for the car ride. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, then you learn though, look, if I got to make sure who owns this joint and you want to put it on record. So that's the other thing, you put things on record. So even if I'm doing an armored car, you got to put it on record. There's people you're involved with, something happens to somebody, they want to know what's happening. But whatever it is, it's got to go on record or you could get in trouble. And if it happens a few times, they know that you're not putting it on record because you're hiding money. And you figure if there's not a problem, I'm going to keep the money. So a lot of people will listen to this and go, I've had this before. Well, oh, you must have been just like one of their minions and you robbed and kicked up to the mob. They were like shaking you down. Not at all. This is just how it works. It's just the structure of the mob. It's how it works. If you're extorting somebody for millions of dollars, you got to put it on record. You answer to the family, and the family is the strength where your strength comes from. If somebody locks you up and puts you in jail, you might go to the family and you got to go, look, do me a favor, go talk to this guy. Tell him to press the charges or tell him not to cooperate. I got to get the hell out of here. Eventually the feds got a better handle on that and they knew how to handle things. And I tip my hat to the agents who went after me. They did a great job. I mean, they turned over
I was going to ask you, how'd you get caught?
Yeah. So I never got caught in the act. When we did a million things and got away with it. And literally once we left the scene of the crime, it was done. We would unload hijacked trucks. In a friend of mine's, he had a big warehouse we'd use. The FBI found that place eventually. But we used different places, but we would, unload the truck, then dump the truck. And it was just starting to become the age of tracking devices where there's quite a few trucks where I had to rip out the tracking device. It was hidden in the dashboard or under the hood. And I did that to make sure that was the first thing I did before I went any further, knowing that they could track me. But also too, if we grabbed the guy, we'd usually hold the guy long enough, to get rid of the truck and unload it, and then tell the guy, we told him right away, you're going to be fine. We won't hurt you. We just want the truck. I'm not saying that's excusable. Anybody who's listening, it's not something that I'm saying makes us good people, that we were nice to him. But I'm just saying, as a matter of fact, we were as kind as we could be to the people because we knew that they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, you're looking for the goods that they're traveling with.
We just want the goods. And we would tell them, we don't want to hurt you. And we promise you we won't. We just want the goods. And then a lot of times it's a give up where, a guy would come to me and say, look, I drive the truck, I'll give it to you, just give me a crack when I'm not looking. So I got a mark on me or something, or, time me out. Yeah, it's happened. There was one guy, I liked him so much I couldn't hit him. I had to have somebody else do it. I said, I can't.
I mean, you just got to outsource that. Yeah. It's too good of friends. Just have whoever do it. So, what you're talking about, the early inception of tracking devices, man, we are in a different actual literal century now than when you're talking about that. How much harder would it be for you to do the things that you were doing in the technological age that we are in now?
Absolutely impossible. So just think about what you just said, right? Imagine the things that changed. And it's we're in a different age. It's a different century.
Yeah.
And it's mind-boggling. Just the tracking right now, as soon as it would go off the route, forget about him holding the guy. Like if it makes a left turn and not a right,
Oh, they're getting an alert like that. Yeah.
an alert, and I'm getting pulled over at the next stop. So that's one thing. Then they got helicopters, so they could send out that, with the tracking. How about this? How about Sparks Steakhouse? I mentioned when John Gotti took over the family, he killed Castellano and Bellotti in Midtown Manhattan. They had 100 witnesses that were there, and all they could say was, I saw a bunch. By the way, my friend, not Sammy the Bull Gravano, a friend of mine, Joe Watts was the guy who came up with that idea, the trench coats and the Russian hats. But they were all wearing trench coats and like Cossack hats. So all the witnesses said, they said, all I saw was a bunch of guys dressed the same. Nobody could ID anyone. So it was
All
great. Right. And, but imagine that today, you'd have 100 people iPhoning it. Going, they're shooting Castellano, look, and you'd see the whole hit on iPhone. Then you'd follow the guys as they're leaving up the avenue and hopping in a car. Like everybody would film it today. You couldn't even do that hit today.
Let alone every probably square inch of New York is covered by a camera of some kind post 9/11.
That's right. It's right. What you just said is so true. A friend of mine from Staten Island, he goes, did you see the news? This was a few months ago. And did you see that? I go, no. He goes, a guy shot a guy on the West Side Highway in Manhattan. They followed him from camera to camera to camera until he went up to his doorstep in Brooklyn.
God.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
No, so, not if you're going to be on the wrong side of the law, trying to be invisible in an era where, I just, man, I can see why a lot of people are, shifting over to technology-based crimes or scams or things that don't rely on an actual face-to-face interaction in the real world.
Yeah, that's exactly right too. Everything is this like online ghost scams. And that's exactly right. People would get caught in a minute. When I first had a cell phone, we used to pay. The first cell phones that came out, we would pay $500, and a guy would give us these phones. They were like, I don't know if you remember, like, hello, they were like military.
You had to carry a suitcase.
Exactly. Yeah. They were like, you ever see like the military guy in World War II with a phone?
Oh yeah. The trench phone. Yep.
Yeah. And we'd pay $500, and some rich guy who could afford the newest cell phones that just came out when the industry was brand new, we would be tapped into his line. And then he would get a bill for like, $5,000 at the end of the month because we burnt out the phone, and there was no way to track us. We just throw the phone in the garbage, 500. We used it for a month, and you get rid of it. By the time he gets his bill, he's going to know he was scammed, and he's going to call and say, someone has got a dupe phone of mine running around with it. Now, imagine trying to be a criminal with this thing, with an iPhone, everywhere you go. I mean, they could follow you. They could listen to you. They could, if they want, so, I mean, law enforcement, I believe, has the tools to stop most crime if they were let loose. I think that there's a lot of restraints that law enforcement have to deal with. I have friends now today. I have as many friends that are retired FBI agents as I have that are retired mobsters. So, I get to talk to them and you kind of, just, it's a
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I know you decided to go straight after you got out of prison. You educated yourself in prison. You've written, you speak now. And it's interesting to me, your background, you've interfaced with some, what I would call other criminal organizations or gangs or cartels, and you've talked with them and you've interviewed them. I guess it's a two-part question. One, are you seeing a lot of similarities in how those organizations are structured and run themselves towards, and how you guys were doing it inside of the mafia? And two, what would you tell law enforcement if they would listen? Because if they do have the tools, if you think that they do have the tools, what are they missing? Now, not necessarily pointing this towards organized crime. But let's say, the soup du jour of the day is cartels and probably terrorist cells, which people who think terrorist cells are running loose and fast, they're highly structured, at least in my experience of, looking for them for a very long period of time. They're far more structured than most people would want to think. But what advice would you give to law enforcement? What would you have them change if they do have the tools? How would you attack those organizations if you were the one able to throw the levers?
So the conundrum is, in our society, this is why I said their hands are tied a little. The conundrum is that we have a very, very efficient law enforcement people. They're brilliant, a lot of them. We have forensic sciences has gotten to a point where it's incredible. The evolution of forensic science and just investigative tools at their disposal. And also too, everything is interconnected, where back in like the J. Edgar Hoover days, you cross state lines. If I just went to Jersey, I couldn't get caught by the cops in New York because they're not allowed to look for me in Jersey, or they can't find me in Jersey. And you could be on the lam for the rest of your life, just like right over the border, where everything's now interconnected on a federal level with all of these DNA, fingerprint
databases,
systems,
all sorts of
databases. Yeah, correct. But here's the conundrum. And this is something that, I'll always grapple with. I'm a firm believer in a free society, and habeas corpus, due process, etc. And I'll give you an example. So you mentioned when I went to the gangs, and I did Inside the Gangsters Code for Discovery Channel, and I went to all these different gangs around the world. The Philippines, we flipped the government. I had no idea, and I didn't even believe the story when I first heard it. They said Duterte took power using your documentary. I said, bullshit. And then it turned out, I didn't believe it. I'm getting emails. I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And then at some point, the Manila Times ran an article, and then Duterte invites me to watch the documentary in front of Congress, which was wild. And then Time Magazine ran a story about it. Basically, I went in and I showed this prison that had like 20,000 inmates, and the prisoners ran the prison themselves, and they had connections to politicians and stuff. And it was a great documentary. Mm-hmm. But unbeknownst to me, Duterte then took it and used it as a propaganda tool to say that the old government, the Aquinos, were in bed with they're new now. I think the Aquinos are back in, but they're in bed with the gangsters, and this is how things work. And I need to crack down on the drugs and stuff. And I need basically, my hands untied to do it. And he got power, and the Filipino people were tired of being like robbed. They had these like jitneys. They were being stuck up every day. They couldn't even go to work. So they had had it up to here, and they're like, Duterte may be a strong man, and he may be willing to, sort of like just get rid of civil liberties, but it's what we need at the moment. So if you let a society get to that point, people are going to be willing to give up some of their own civil liberties in order to stop the problem. So here in America, what I think is the problem with law enforcement, if they were told they could run wild without having to worry about people's rights and civil liberties, I think they could get a lot more done a lot quicker. But I do like the fact that there needs to be a balance, and I'll explain to you why. So when I went to Poland, which was one of the places we went, Poland never had a mafia. And so from when Stalin cleaned up Eastern Europe after the war and basically took over, and then put the Iron Curtain up, they were sucked up into the communist world. And if there was an illegal organization like a mafia, they'd stamp them right out. It's tyranny. It's communism. It's Marxism. We don't have time for you. We're not. You're getting all locked up or killed overnight. We can't let you do this. Same thing with fascist Italy. When Mussolini took power, he stomped out the mob like overnight because he was a tyrant. And they were just like, they were done in Sicily. Whoever wasn't killed was locked up. And they were liberated finally when the Allied forces, the British through Montgomery and the Americans through Patton, took over Sicily before they hopped over to the continent and then faced the Nazis on the continent. But basically, a tyrant could stamp out any organized crime, whereas people who have to worry about civil liberties can't. So when the wall fell in 1991, and Poland now was liberated from communist rule, and they felt like they had, suddenly a mafia sprung up, the Prushkov mafia, and they're prospering and they're doing great. So I had to look at this and I'm saying, okay, what do I make out of this? Well, this is the cost of freedom. You get some of this shit, you have to deal with it. And it might be the sign of a healthy country when you have criminal activity, like when you have an Italian mafia. It might be the worst thing in the world because they have their hands in everything in the garment industry, which equals a tax to people. In the trucking industry, every time a truck then drives a mile, someone's paying for that with the goods. But it's the cost of freedom, and it's the cost of having civil liberties where the government knows who they are, but can't just throw them in jail. So that's sort of like, I think, the balance that President Trump is now trying to deal with, where he wants to stomp out the cartels and the gangs, and he needs to. And I'm all behind him for that. Get rid of them. Mm-hmm. We don't need them. We don't want them. We don't need them taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. That's despicable. That's atrocious conduct for a third world nation, let alone us. So, it's like something has to be done. And I think that he's struggling with his advisors to figure out how the hell to pull it off and get it done, without having everybody go tyrant, 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 which is they're going to do anyway, and they do every day. But I think that's sort of the struggle. And so, again, I'm an advocate for the rule of law. I studied law when I was in prison. I reversed one of my cases, a federal case, pro se. So I did, I learned enough law to file briefs with the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and reverse a case that's still cited in courtrooms. And I had gone through the best attorneys money could buy. I had William Kunstler. Briefly, I had very briefly Barry Slotnick, but another 7 attorneys that were all high-powered attorneys. Charles Carnesi, who represented John Gotti Jr., I had him. I had the best attorneys money could buy, and then I ended up studying law myself and reversing one of my cases myself, because you're never going to pay somebody to do the job that you want them to do for your life.
Oh yeah, they're never going to be as passionate about, you're the one sitting inside of the cell trying to do everything you can to change your view metaphorically. Mm-hmm. Actually, probably literally as well.
That's right.
From day one, Change Agents has been about one thing: telling the stories of people who risk everything to make a difference.
I was trying to get him to confess to murdering those veterans at the VA hospital.
I guess you got to go all the way up the food chain.
This season, we're raising the stakes. We're going to sit down with men and women who aren't just helping communities, they're stepping to the most dangerous hidden corners of the world. These are the voices most people never hear, operating behind the headline, under fire, and in the dark. I'm Andy Stumpf, and this is Change Agents, an Ironclad original. New episodes are going to drop every Wednesday. You can watch and listen on YouTube at This Is Ironclad and everywhere else that you get your podcasts. So when you got out, how does you talked about, you've described it as going straight, wanting to leave that life. How are people treated if they want to do that? And I'm assuming it's probably different before you get your button and then after, because you were not at a place where you got that. Did they just tell you like, hey, you do you, we'll do us? And because it seems like you've also maintained friendships. I'm just curious about how the exit works.
Yeah. So I approached all the guys I was in jail with when I decided because I was facing life. And how I was facing life, I wasn't charged with bodies, but if you accumulate all the charges, so like just on my FBI indictment, there was, let's say, for example, there's 10 heists and hijackings, and each one carries a 10-year statute. Mm-hmm. And then each time a gun is used in the commission of a crime, it's an additional 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you add that up, you're facing 150. And there were newspaper articles at the time, about my case that said Ferrante is facing 150 years in prison if he gets convicted, or 125 years if he's convicted. And it's true. If you do test the government and you want to take them to trial and you have the audacity to make them, to tie up a courtroom for 2 months or 3 months and pick a jury because you think you're innocent, which I know I'm not, they have to punish you for that. And the punishment is going to be in the sentence. So they would give you that. And I had friends of mine who I tried to counsel and say, look, take the plea. You're guilty. You did these things. Even guys that I had friends of mine who were charged with multiple murders and they're being offered 20 years. And I'm saying, look, and I know what happened, meaning they killed the guys. And, 20 ain't so bad. You got to do, 85%, which is like 17 years. And you'll be home. You'll still be this age or that age. And some of them were smart enough to take the deal and pack it in and say, I'll do my time. And they're out as I'm speaking now. A lot of those guys are out. And then a couple of them said, no, F that. They ain't got nothing on me. I'm going to roll the dice, and they're done. And then a lot of times too, even cases like my own, where there weren't any bodies and they rolled the dice and then they charge, as soon as you roll the dice and you tie up that courtroom, the prosecutor and judge are pissed. We
call that the fuck around and find out stage.
Exactly. It's the best way to say it. Best way to say it. Exactly. And then they hammer them. They'll say, okay, fine. Now you're convicted of the 10 counts and this is what you're going to get. And you're going to do it. And, I have friends that are still away. I have a friend, Sal. He's still away now, 35 years later. And, he's on a case exactly identical to mine. And, we begged him to take the plea. I said, take the plea. Take the plea. Just admit you're guilty. They drop charges. They want to keep the system moving. It'll grind to a halt. It's very expensive to try everyone. So
it's also a victory for them as well, too. They can show a victory with less manpower and less time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And they rack up victories. A lot of them are career prosecutors, and they like the victories, and they put another notch in their belt, and they move on. And it's literally a day in court. You get, you have the plea allocution. You come back one more day, you get sentenced, and you're done. So it's 2 days in court as opposed to months tying up a trial and jurors. So yeah, so that said, I was facing life, but I approached all the guys while I was facing life, the heads, bosses, and underbosses, and I said, listen, I had already decided that I'm done, but I'm not going to rat. I said, there's no way. They're begging me to rat. They're putting so much pressure on me, but I ain't never going to snitch. I said, guys, I'm here with you. I'm never leaving. But if I ever get out of here, if I could ever make my way out of this place, I just want to be left alone. And with all the rats that are snitching on everybody and packing up in the middle of the night and going into the program, it's hard to argue with me. I'm telling you, I'm going to be next to you for the rest of my life if I have to be. I promise you, I'm leaving in a pine box. If that's the case, then that's the case. But if I could get out after 10, after 15, after 20, I'm done. Now, the other thing, like you said, the oath thing, if you take an oath, it might be a little harder, where I thought I was cheated when I got locked up and my mind was still mobbed up. I'm like, son of a bitch, all my friends are getting straightened out now, and I missed the boat. I can't believe I'm stuck in here. I was sick to my stomach. And when I decided that I'm done with this shit, that's the point where I said to myself, maybe it was a blessing in disguise. Maybe a higher power was looking out for me, because it's that much easier now to make the break. Had I got it, I would have been so happy, but it would have ruined my life now, because now, they're going to go, well, what do you mean you're leaving? Now, things have changed to the point, I should add, though, that it's at a point now where you can leave with like a quote unquote honorable discharge. Like my friend Vic Rena, who I mentioned, whose father was the boss, when he beat the murder RICO, he said, I'm leaving. And he left with an honorable discharge. He did his time. He did 10 years on another murder. And then he finished his time, and he said to me, I'm done. And then we had approached a guy by the name of Wild Bill Catolo, him and I, while we were away. And Billy beat his case of murder RICO. Billy was a captain in the Colombo family too. And we told Billy, look, go your own way. Be done with this shit. You should. And he swore he was. And then he went back to the life, and he got trunked. Yeah. Yeah. They found him in a landfill, I think, out in Long Island. So, we knew that it was done. So just to tell you why it was done for me. So there's a few reasons. One is when I was on the street and you heard somebody disappeared, say, okay, Joey Nine Fingers and, Frankie Blue Eyes, whoever the frig they were, so-and-so disappeared. And you know the guy, right? So you say, okay, you must have did something that warranted it. And you don't ask questions. It's like you're in the military. You don't ask why they're sending you to a country. You assume that the people that you've sworn oath to a country. Yeah. And you assume that the people who are making decisions for this country are going to send you to places where we need you. If we had every soldier scratching his head going, why the hell am I landing in Fallujah? I don't know if I should be in Fallujah. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. Who called this one? You can't have that. You gotta, or my grandfather, when he was on a boat, we're sending you now to Iwo Jima. I don't want to be in Iwo Jima. Why we got to be in Iwo Jima or wherever? So you can't
Choice
have
is above your pay grade.
It's above your pay grade. So if a guy disappeared, I just said, he did something that. So now I'm in jail, and we're all playing pinochle and spades, and we're talking about our cases, at the card table. And guys are, coming up to me, oh, Louis, do me a favor. This is once I started to read, and they saw that like I'm reading 18 hours a day. Louis, can you do me a favor and look over this indictment for me? Tell me what's going on here. I don't know what the fuck to tell my lawyer. Excuse my language. So,
it's the internet. We can say
paraphrasing. Yeah. So, and he said, so they'd say to me, like, and I'd look at the indictment, I'd say, wow, this guy died for nothing. This guy got killed because the guy wanted his business, or the guy was mislabeled a rat because someone wanted his loan shark book. Or, and I'm going, this is crazy. I was around all snakes. I could never. If you told me somebody raped my daughter or my sister or my wife, if you called me at 3:00 in the morning and you said, I got the guy, Louis, do me a favor. I know where he is. I need you to take a ride with me. He's dead. I'm coming with you and he's dead. I'm burying him with you tonight. He's gone. That's like, but if you said to me, I'm going to kill a guy and he's worth $1 billion and I'm going to take all his rackets, I'd tell you, what are you, losing your mind? What's wrong with you? We can make money tomorrow. You don't got to kill somebody for that.
Yeah.
Let's try to make money with the guy. Maybe we could do something with him. Like I would think that was crazy. But now I'm in jail with everybody and I'm realizing that a lot of the murders were for money. And I'm going, wow, what a bunch of greedy pigs. These guys were like king cobra snakes that were around me. And I had no idea.
In my world, I mean, I look back and a lot of wars were for money too.
Well,
Similar.
It's a big awakening. It's a big awakening and it's sad. Maybe I used something that hit home on you then right there because
it just makes sense. God, you follow things back up to the apex and you want it to be for some altruistic reason. And constantly you find people making decisions for their own personal gain and benefit. Yeah.
So another comparison that I experienced right there, exactly the same.
Yeah.
Where I'm going, I believed in this. I'm willing to die for it. I'm willing to even kill for it if I have to. But this isn't what I signed on for. This is quite different than what I had imagined. And, I'm not going to be a fool any longer, but I'm still not going to rat. So that was the thing. So like, even if you're in the midst of a war and you realize that, what you said, this war's for money and I was sent here for money, you're still not going to go against the guys in your platoon or your brigade or whatever you call them, right?
Yep.
Those are your friends. Those are the guys you love. So I still felt like, even though I can't stand this shit now and I'm looking at it from a different viewpoint, I'm still not ratting on my friends. There's no way. I'm never going to take the stand. I made these decisions myself. I'm responsible for my own decisions. And even if I was duped, that's still my fault. It's not someone else's fault. So whatever I got to do. So I told those guys, I'll do life if I have to. I just want to be done and be let go if I could ever get out of here. And they were like, fine, Louis. And so the guys who I never ratted on, who are all wise guys now by the time I got home, and they're all been elevated to positions of power, they knew me. So I'd bump into them. They give me big hugs and kisses. What do you need? What can I do for you? Because they know I never ratted. They knew what we did together. And the statute's up now. I'm not, it's not like I even talking about this where the FBI is going to go tell us who they were and what they did. I'm talking about just crimes, no murder where there's not a statute. I'm talking about criminal activity. But we did all that together and I could have put them in jail for it and I didn't. So they knew me and loved me. Now, guys who didn't know me, that could be a different story. If they don't know me, they could go, why is he talking? Why is he talking to Andy? He shouldn't be talking about this life. That's like a ratting. That's a rat. Those are different guys. They don't know me. But the guys who know me, if they watch this, they're going to go, that's Louis. We know what we did together and he never talked about it. And he did his time. So in the end, I reversed one of my cases, but I still did 8.5 years hard time. It's a long time, 8.5 years in a cell in the worst places too. Like I said, Lewisburg was like, it didn't get worse than that where, you got to walk the corridors not knowing when you could get killed. So after the Aryan Brotherhood killed the black Muslims, they shipped the Aryans out. And then they were just like, I'm Italian. So I'm like, all right. They go, you got to watch out because the blacks might kill you. I go, I got no beef with the blacks. They go, yeah, but they want to kill a white guy and you're close enough because the Aryans were shipped out. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. So it's like,
fuck.
Yeah. But so I mean, I'm walking around my tier block with a machete at all times. I'd go to the shower with one because I'm like ready to defend myself if I have to. Yeah.
I mean, what option do you have when you're placed in that environment?
Yeah.
Your story is fascinating, but I want to be respectful of your time as well. What do you want to leave the audience with?
I think criminal activity is obviously wrong, but it's wrong on every level. Elon Musk and Doge have uncovered a lot of activity at the highest levels of government that I feel is wrong too. So it could happen on a lot of different levels. A lot of politicians have entered Congress, whether the Senate or the House, and they go in there worth $4 or $5 grand and they leave there worth $4 or $5 million or 50 million. So something, obviously we're not idiots. We know something's wrong. So there's criminal activity on every level. And I think it's wrong on every level. I also think that we come from a great country where I cherish freedom and I cherish the rule of law. And I've learned the hard way to respect the law. I was lawless my whole life until I respected it and learned. I learned it from the other side, what it's about. And I have a lot of confidence in the law and respect for the law. And I think we need to remain a nation of laws. And I'm rooting. I don't know if your listeners or viewers are all for Trump or all hate him or love him because it's such a divided.
Who knows?
Who
knows? We hit upload, and whoever downloads it.
Yeah, but I just want to say that I think that the fact that he wants to tackle it is a good thing. And I just hope that he stays within the boundaries of the law at all times. And that's the best thing I could say at this point. I think it's a good thing that he's attacking it. I hope that he stays within the boundaries of the law. And that's pretty much it. I think, you need a free nation. You have to balance it with, stamping out the evil, and it always has to be balanced. And, I think I'm middle of the way. So, I look at things, I weigh each thing separately. I'm a historian, so I could already see today's activities through, I think, the viewpoint of a historian. By the way, I just finished my the trilogy. I wrote a trilogy, History of the American Mafia, Borgata, Rise of Empire, Borgata, Clash of Titans, and Borgata, Autumn of Empire. So it shows the rise and fall of the mafia. And there are a lot of parallels within that rise and fall in the American tapestry, us as a nation. And you could follow it. My epilogue for volume 3 we'll discuss that at length. But again, I try to stay apolitical, and I try to view things each in and of itself in isolation. And I think that it's good that he's tackling crime in our country. We have a problem with it. We need to stamp it out. But I hope, once again, he stays within the boundaries of the law at all times. And let's hope that we do our best that way. When Duterte took over the Philippines and I was interviewed, I was happy that he was attacking that problem for the people of the Philippines. They couldn't go to work without being stuck up. They couldn't live in their house without being broken into. So something had to be done. But I disagreed with him sending police out in the middle of the night and gunning down gangsters. And if there were a few innocent casualties, okay, so be it. I don't agree with that. I believe you have to continue to respect the law in all ways, build a case, do the homework, do the time, and put away the right people. And, it might be a little more frustrating for law enforcement agents, but if they do put the time in and they're willing to, they could get those people. They'll get them, they'll nail them, and they'll round them up. And let's not tie their hands either unnecessarily. Let's not come up with reasons to tie law enforcement's hands because we're overplaying the whole civil liberties thing. They need to be a little free to do their job too, where they need to
balance.
They need to balance. You got cops in America that are terrified of arresting people because they don't know, like, if you're either going to arrest the person, if the person tries to attack you, what are you going to do? I'm either going to defend my life and maybe get away with this with my life, or defend my life and maybe go to jail for the rest of my life because I did something wrong in the midst of defending myself. So I really felt bad for law enforcement officers when they had to go through that shit. I'll be honest with you. Yeah. When they're walking on eggshells. We all know there are a couple of bad seeds in everything, whether it's the mob, the military, the law enforcement community. There are people who are like abnormal to what the rest of the people are doing.
Yeah, they're anomalous. I mean, we're just talking about people. Yeah, the law enforcement occupation is seemingly impossible, but I'm glad there's still people signing up to do it.
They're willing to do it. I tip my hat to them. I saw a young cop recently and I wanted to say, what the hell did you do? But instead I said, thanks for your service. Appreciate it. But you want to say to them, wow, that takes balls. Yeah. Tough one nowadays, but yeah.
Well, Lou, I can't thank you enough for your time, man. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Likewise. Same here, Andy. And thanks for the time, bud.
Yeah, man. Have a great day.
Great.
Bye. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. I'll see everybody next week with an all-new guest and an all-new topic. See you then.